Was Abraham righteous because of faith or works? That's what we're going to talk about today in Romans 4. Remember, we've talked now about the wages of sin and how people fall away, but yet there is grace and peace and mercy in Jesus Christ. He is the one who judges the heart, and he's the one who forgives. So now Paul starts this conversation in Romans, which remember is to a congregation of some Jewish, some Gentile Christians. This big discussion about does everyone need grace? Our works are the thing that's important. Why was Abraham so special to the Jewish people? And he's going to explain it, Jews and Gentiles alike. He says that the Jews who have the law, we talked about that before, right? There's two groups of people. There's Jews who had the law. They knew what they were doing and when they were doing what was wrong, and it still condemned them. And then you had the Gentiles who didn't have the law, but the law is written in the world. It is obvious to everyone. However, they still fall short of the law. They knew in their hearts they were sinning when they were sinning, and they are still judged by it. But both sides are given grace. Whether Jew or Gentile, they both live under the same law, and they both get the same forgiveness. That's the way it is. So he starts off again, saying that the Jews have lived under the law and have fallen, and the Gentiles who never lived under the law don't even know what it is, officially. So that's very apparent, except for what is very visual in the world as law. Everyone has fallen short. Everyone. That is going to be everyone needs God's forgiveness. There is no one who doesn't need God's forgiveness. And Paul continues that. Now, Abraham is going to be a big deal to the Jewish people, and we think of him as, the father, the patriarch of the Jewish faith. He would have been Noah's grandson. And so if you think about Abraham, he lived in Ur, which at that time was the world's largest city. And it was primarily, or was, a pagan city. His father made idols. And yet, his grandfather was Noah. So you can kind of see that things were bad. The flood happens. Things don't get much better. People are people in the end. But Abraham would have learned something from his grandfather. That's the idea. And now he is the patriarch of the Jewish faith and is always mentioned. When you're Jewish, it's always, the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It's always mentioned like that. And so he's the guy who came in faithful to God. And the reality is I don't think Abraham wanted to leave his home. He was elderly. He had a wife who was also older. And he is told to go and to be faithful to God. So this is why Paul now is going to explain the story of Abraham, because I think it'll help make their congregation a little bit more cohesive, and it'll explain what the true faith is about. Maybe he's trying to settle this debate that's happening between the Jews and the Gentiles by saying, you have this wrong. Let's talk about Abraham. So he says that, we gain anything because Abraham became before us, as the Jewish lineage. And if Abraham was just justified by words or actions, think about it that way, he would have something to boast about. But instead, it was all because of God. He doesn't have anything to boast about because it was God through faith that Abraham had, that belief in God, the reliance on God counted him as righteous. It wasn't because of his works, and it wasn't because he left Ur like he was asked to do. It wasn't because he did all of these things as he was supposed to do. It started with faith. Abraham believed in God and believed that God came to save his soul, every soul, justify his sins, every sin, and the resurrection. Was responsible for the eventual resurrection. Death, is a result of sin, but we're all going to be restored from that wage of sin. And you think about it, that if you said, well, I don't feel like moving, well, it's God's will for him to move. That doesn't mean that's what made him righteous, the fact that he did something against his own will. It made him obedient and dutiful, and living the kind of life that God called them to live in that moment, not all the time. So let's imagine that, we're supposed to work and we get wages and they come from our employer. They're not a gift, right? They are in response to something we earned. This is how much you earn. This is how much you're going to get paid. And then you have someone who doesn't work towards it. Do they deserve to have this justification through faith too? Is it because of God's work or is it because of your work? That's the idea. It doesn't work the same way our wages do. And so think about that. Jesus, God, he's the one who justifies the godly and makes an injustice with the ungodly. The ones who do not believe in God, do not follow in him, do not have faith in them. He's that person. And when you have someone who is faith, the faith is counted as righteousness, meaning that this sin, see, like I said, this is good. But when Jesus died for everybody's sin, that's what makes us righteous. And in that faith that God gave us and us not rejecting it, we are considered to be along with righteousness, even if you haven't done a thing. And David also speaks of blessings from who God counts as righteousness apart from works. So it's very confusing because, like I said, the way that Paul said it makes you think that it has to do with works. And many people believed that it had to do with works. This is a big fight. You might have heard about it. It's called the Reformation. But, people get a little off track on things, I think. And in this particular case, it is not works. And I believe every church believes this. It is not works that makes us saved. We don't get counted as righteous because of these works. We do these works because God is righteous, because God is what we have faith in, because we love God and we want to do the things that God has asked us. It's kind of a reverse way. So that's how it is. A lot of people, like I said, throughout history got kind of tied up that we earn our way to heaven. And if you didn't do what I say, I told you to do this thing, Jill, and you didn't do it, you don't get to go to heaven. I said so. We don't get to say so either. That's where you get that people gained this kind of power in the Middle Ages that I have the ability to say whether you worked hard enough to go to heaven, and that is not how it works at all. And sometimes people would literally say, God told me what you should do, and you should go and do this thing for me, and you will be saved, or pay this price, or do this thing. The idea is that it's not works at all. We are lawless people. Like I said, how many years after Noah and the flood and everything else, it all just went back to being horrible again. And now we're in making idols. Our sins are covered because the sins were covered by Jesus and his death. He quotes Psalms 32:1 to say, again, our sins are covered. Again, not the New Testament and not in the prophets. This is right from the very beginning. And it's because the Lord is not going to count our sins against us. We are almost like we're in a court and we're at a trial. And the judge looks at all the counts against us and looks at us. Count 1, not doing it towards you. Count 2, not counting it towards you either. These things are no longer against you. Throws them all out right in front of you. Why? Because Jesus came in earlier and said, I'm going to pay the debts. I'm going to pay everything that's wrong. I'm going to pay the retribution for all the sins. This is a blessing. This is a blessing. And it is for the circumcised and the uncircumcised. And this is going to go back into that theme. We talked about that when in Acts, Paul went to Jerusalem and Peter went to Jerusalem, and they went and had James, who's now the bishop of Jerusalem, make a decision. Do Gentiles have to get circumcised? This is part of the covenant. The Jewish believers in Christianity were like, yes, they do. They have to be Jewish before they can become Christian. And what James decided, which was a hard decision because he was Jewish, he was religiously educated, and he could have easily just sided with the Jewish faction in this. And what he said instead was, no, this is not what saves you. Circumcision doesn't save you. So now we're going to go back to that theme again. Faith was counted to Abraham as righteousness because he believed in God. And he believed in what God was going to do. This sacrifice, this rescue plan, and the resurrection. Everything that God was going to do, Abraham believed in this promise of God. And so he did receive circumcision, which I think men in this particular era had not voted for, but it was a sign. It was a sign that he had faith in God, and he had that faith in God before he was circumcised. So you can't say that Abraham wasn't saved by faith before he got circumcised. He had that faith. He had that faith after he got circumcised. The circumcision is a sign. It is not the actual covenant. It is not the actual agreement for being saved. So this is the part where Jesus was talking about the circumcision of the heart, that this is supposed to be the sign, the covenant between us and God, that if we don't have a circumcision of the heart, it's almost as if you were uncircumcised if you had been circumcised. Or if you were not circumcised and you were a Gentile, it is as you are circumcised. That's what he's saying. Abraham was circumcised, but before he believed in God, he had faith in God, and I'm sure that Abraham wanted to know, you mean I didn't have to do that? But that was an outward sign of things. We have outward signs of our faith. There are times where you have to stand apart, and there are times where you have to make, not have to for your salvation, but to be a people, to have people look at you and say, oh, wait, you're different. You have a different thing going on. And they had circumcision at that time, so we could tell who is really for God and who is just, say, a clinger-on, a Klingon. A Klingon. Who was a Klingon? Who was someone who was just saying it to get by, to get better trade, that kind of thing. So this is a way of tribe identity, I guess, is a way to say it. But it didn't mean you were saved or not saved. And he said, that to make him the father of the circumcised, he was circumcised. But he's also the father of the uncircumcised, the Gentiles. When God promised that Abraham was going to be the father of many nations and the world would be blessed through Abraham, it's the whole world. Circumcised and not circumcised. I don't think I've ever said the word circumcised more in my entire life. So you can see, when Luke writes, he's very, very clear. And I think all the gospel writers are very, very clear. And you can tell that Paul is some kind of genius. That when he writes, you kind of sit there for a while and go, wait, what? Let me try to imagine this. And just imagine, like I said, they're reading this letter aloud to these home churches. And everyone had to, it's a big, long letter, digesting this, what does this mean now? Imagine, like I said, you're in Rome and you get through the first full paragraphs and you say, wait, read the rest of it later. I got to clear my head, because this is a lot. That's the idea. But we depend on faith that the promises of grace may be on us and that we may rest in that grace. Resting in that grace meaning to have that peace that we can go, grace. I have confidence in my salvation. I have confidence that God is with me. I put trust in God. And even if I've done so many bad things in my life, or even if I've walked away from God for so many years, but now I'm back, now we have rest inside of grace. When I read that passage, it made me think of way back in the Gospels where they're all in a boat. The apostles are on a boat, and Jesus is sleeping in the boat, and they're all flipped out, and they wake him up, and they say, how can you sleep during this? That's a man who knows his God, right? When you have rest in grace, you can sleep like that. In the biggest storms of life, you can sleep like that because you can trust in the Lord. And I've been meeting people all my life, and some people would say, I've been a Christian my whole life, and oh no, I did something, and now God can never forgive me. And then I think about people like me who came to Christianity later in life, and they think, oh no, I spent so many years not believing in God. I think about the things I did or the things I said. I can't, believe that God would save me or forgive me too. But that's the idea, is that this message was that God is always going to forgive you. That there is no spokesperson. There's no person who can say whether God will or will not forgive you. God will forgive you if you come to him. He said all that come to him will be forgiven, will have this race. So it's not true when someone, if anyone, tries to tell you anything different, including you. If you try to tell yourself, I'm beyond saving, untrue. So that's the idea. And if we stare at Abraham's faith and look at it really carefully, God told Abraham who he was. Abraham followed and had faith in him. Bob Guzek, who's the pastor over in Santa Barbara, had this really interesting point. Like I said, he wrote a commentary that I really like, that up to this point, Abram was kind of a trick because it meant father. And Abram was a father of nobody. He didn't have children. His wife was an older age. They couldn't have children. They probably tried. They couldn't have children. And God says, you know what? I'm going to give you a different name. And Abraham was like, oh, thank goodness, because I'm not a father and my name means father. I'm going to call you the father of many nations. I just thought I was going to get rid of that name, and now you're making it even worse. How can I be the father of many nations when I'm not the father of anybody? And so he probably wondered, me? I mean, me? I'm going to be a father? I wanted to have kids, but it didn't happen for me. And God comes and says, I'm going to make you, to Sarah, the mother of all nations. Because I'm sure this first thought was, well, I guess if we're going to have kids now, I'm probably going to have like a younger wife. And instead, no, Sarah, you are going to be the mother of nations. And she kind of laughed and she says, well, I don't know about that. He believed in God. He followed God. He did the things that God told him to do, not just because he was trying to justify his life or make up for past sins, but because he had the hope of all these things, that he was going to be the father of all nations, that all the nations would be blessed through him. And it didn't weaken his faith. We live in a very scientific age. And so if someone came to me and said, Jill, you're going to be the mother of many nations, and I'd be like, don't think so. I don't think it's going to happen for me. But you know what? It did happen for Abraham, and it happened for Sarah too. So you got to trust in the Lord. That's amazing. And it said that there was, that he was about 100 years old, 99. And when he considered the barrenness of Sarah's womb. So that's why they couldn't have kids. So he's going, well, what it is. But you know what? God said it. I'm going to believe it. No matter of strangeness in this process or this promise made him waver. He grew strong in his faith. This is what makes Abraham such an incredible figure, is that not only did he leave his home when he didn't want to leave his home, not only did he do all the things that God told him to do, he stuck to everything. He kept his faith. We have other stories, which we'll get to when we get to this chapter, that didn't go so well for him. He was not sinless, but he understood the things that God was going to promise him. And he just says, well, we'll see how it turns out. Paul is crediting to him, saying, because of this faith, it's counted towards him as righteousness. Not saving, but that faith in him is God's work of saving him. So it's going to be that way for us too. It's going to be counted for us because we believed in Jesus, who lived, raised from the dead, and was resurrected. Removes our sin, justifies us too. We can have the same thing, the same faith Abraham had. And so that's why he's telling us this whole story. And like I said, this is going to mean a lot to the Jewish people. The Gentile people are probably going to understand it. Like I said, you live in a place with mixed faiths. We understand the basics of faiths around us, right? Probably the Gentiles did too, but this explanation is going to make people understand why this is such a big deal. Not just that Abraham did these things and is the father of all Jewish people, but that it was because of faith. And that's what it was. I mean, how many years later, we still hear about Zeus and Apollo and Athena and all those guys. We've heard of them. We know their language was different than ours. Their culture was different. They had an oral tradition, but we heard it. We understood it. I think the Gentiles at that particular period of time would have understood exactly what Paul was saying in this particular case. Because of his faith, that's why Abraham is such a big deal. And that's why it is such a big deal to us too, even if we are Gentiles. So I think it makes that story personal to us too. And that ends chapter 4. Wow. Like I said, can imagine just sort of sitting there and thinking about what was said. What I'm going to meditate on is this idea that Abraham was called righteous, but not because of what he did, but because of who he trusted. This is a kind of trust, a deep confidence in faith in the promises of God, even when they seem impossible. Challenges day to day often here seem impossible. And I want to think about that Abraham didn't just believe in God's existence. He believed in what God would do. And he even said that it went against all natural reason. That's the kind of faith I want to have. And that's not a faith that demands constant proof, but a faith that rests. Remember, we're talking about rests and is bold in God's character. And I want to kind of sit in that phrase, because we heard that rest in grace, to have this poetic line. And it's a command for all of us to release our grip on earning, striving, proving, hoping that we're good enough for God. It means the work's already done. It's already been done. And just like Abraham, we can live in that rest. And not in the things that the world measures and not all the achievements that the world wants us to have. I think Romans 4 really invites us all to have the identity of peace, being in justified faith. That's something that God gives freely and not something I have to perform for. And what I'm going to pray about is the real thanksgiving in this righteousness doesn't depend on my ability to live perfectly, my willingness to trust God. I think like Abraham, I want to believe in those promises, even though they seem delayed, unlikely, not possible, that God would teach me to walk by faith and not by sight, and to forgive me when I fall into that kind of thinking. His love does not depend on my performance, and help me to believe that it's not just words, and not just to believe the words, but believe it inside my heart, that I am justified by faith. I want to be able to sleep in that stormy boat, right? And so I pray for boldness then to speak about impossible things that God has spoken about, this restoration of relationship, healing, new direction, eternal life. All those things are things that someone who hopes against hope, like Abraham did, that maybe this is true. If you're one of these people that sits there and thinks, I don't think this is true, I don't see any evidence for God, but you have hope. That's the idea. Step into that hope. God is inviting you into that hope, just like he invited me into that hope, and he still invites me into that hope. Jesus is the one who works for the ungodly, including me and including you. Rest in that grace today. And what I want to share with others is this idea that freedom comes from understanding you don't have to earn God's approval. So many people think that they have to get their lives together before turning to God. I have to clean up my act. Maybe you're in a relationship, in a situation that you shouldn't be. And God is saying, you don't have to clean that up right now. Come back to me right now. Come back to Jesus right now. He was declared righteousness before he did anything dramatic, Abraham. He believed first, and then later he came back. So don't ever feel unworthy, too broken, too far gone. I said so many horrible things. I said so many horrible things as an atheist. Faith is an open door, wide open door. And the idea that, faith leaves a legacy. Abraham didn't just change his own life or the life of Sarah and of his eventual children. He changed life for all of us. And it's all counted as righteousness. That's powerful. His story is told in the Jewish faith all the time, and in the Christian faith too. And I think, even in other faiths as well. But if we had trust in God, he has more impact for us in our lives than we can even imagine. It becomes a model for us. It becomes a model for our family, our friends, future generations. Faith isn't just personal, it is community. And I want others to see their belief in God truly matters and truly impacts other people as well. All right, everyone, thanks so much. I appreciate it. We're going to talk about Romans 5. That's going to be exciting as well. These books are deep, and I hope you're enjoying the slow roll through the Bible, one small chapter at a time. Feel free to write me. You can reach me at Jill@startwithsmallsteps.com. I'd love to hear from you. And if you have anything to say, you can put a comment right here and say hi. You don't even have to say anything except hi. I appreciate you listening, and have a great day.